What if I told you that you could actually score an A on a high-stakes, highly technical medical exam, right?
Yeah.
But the questions were written in an entirely made-up language.
I mean, it sounds like a joke, right? But it's really not.
No, exactly. Like a test where you literally do not understand a single word of the content, but you still walk away with a passing grade.
Yeah, that scenario isn't just some wild thought experiment. It is a highly documented phenomenon that researchers have just, they've spent decades agonizing over.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the 60-year science of, well, basically hacking the multiple choice test.
Right. We've got this massive stack of sources covering the history, the psychology, and really the structural mechanics of multiple choice exams.
Yeah, and we're putting a heavy focus on high-stakes nursing entrance exams, specifically the TEAS and the HESI.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive is to equip you with the actual tools to beat the test.
Because it's not just about what you know, right?
Exactly. We're going to separate the scientifically proven data-backed strategies from all those debunked test day myths that are, frankly, currently sabotaging test takers everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We aren't just talking about how to, study anatomy or math more effectively. We are talking about exploiting the actual format of the test itself.
Yeah, but to do that effectively, you really have to understand the fundamental concept of what you are fighting against when you sit down at that testing center.
Right.
The underlying theory here is something academics have been aggressively studying since, the mid-20th century.
Long before digital testing was even a thing.
Exactly. Way before computers were involved.
Well, the sources introduce a term for this that, I gotta say, sounds straight out of a 1940s noir detective novel.
Oh, test wiseness.
Test wiseness. It was formally coined in 1965 by three researchers, Jason Millman, Carol Bishop, and Robert Ebel.
And they defined test wiseness as a subject's capacity to receive a high score by utilizing the characteristics and formats of the test, entirely independent of their actual knowledge of the subject matter.
And that phrase, entirely independent, that is the crucial part of the definition.
Because it means you don't actually have to know the material.
Right. The concept actually originated in the 1950s and 60s when Robert Abel and some other psychometricians noticed this incredibly uncomfortable trend in their data.
Uncomfortable how?
Well, they were observing students who possessed the exact same level of underlying content knowledge. So say, two students who knew exactly the same amount of cardiovascular anatomy.
Okay, so they should get the same score.
You'd think so. But they were getting measurably different scores on the exam.
Wow.
Yeah, and the variance wasn't due to knowledge. It was due to one student simply being, more savvy about how multiple choice questions are constructed.
So they understood the mechanics of the maze, rather than the actual content of the maze. Wait, I have to push back on this a little bit. Is test wiseness just like a highly sanitized, fancy academic term for cheating?
I mean, I get why you'd ask that.
Because it really sounds like finding a loophole to just bypass actually learning the material.
Well, here's the thing. It is entirely legal, but testing agencies viewed it as an existential threat to their entire industry.
Really? An existential threat?
Absolutely. To understand why, you have to look at a core principle in their field called construct validity.
Construct validity, okay.
Right. A construct is simply the invisible trait a test is trying to measure.
Like math ability or reading comprehension.
Exactly. So if a standardized nursing test claims to measure your clinical math skills, but your high score actually just reflects your cleverness at eliminating poorly written answer choices,
then the test has zero construct validity.
Yes. It failed to measure math. It measured your puzzle-solving skills instead.
So it's like being an expert at the rules of a game, knowing exactly where the referee is looking and, where their blind spots are, rather than just being inherently good at the sport itself.
That's a great way to put it.
You score points because you know the officiating mechanics.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. And the empirical proof that this referee watching was a real quantifiable phenomenon, well, that arrived a few years later.
Right, in 1968.
Yes. A researcher named Robert L. Slachter decided to build measurement tools to test this exact theory. He developed something called the test of test wiseness.
Which is such a great name.
It really is. And to ensure he was only measuring strategy and not knowledge, he filled the exam with absolute nonsense content.
Just total gibberish.
We are talking about passages covering fake historical events, scrambled vocabulary, just fabricated scientific principles.
And the students could still navigate this absolute nonsense and pull out the correct answers.
They absolutely could. A statistically significant number of test takers could reliably identify the correct answer using only structural cues.
Like what kind of cues?
Things hidden in the grammar, or the length of the options, or just the way the question was phrased.
Wow.
Slachter's work proved to the academic world that test wiseness wasn't just a myth or, like, statistical noise. It was a real, measurable, and highly teachable skill.
Which, I mean, entirely explains the existence of the multi-million-dollar test prep industry today.
Oh, 100%.
Okay, let's unpack this. How do test takers actually deploy this skill against the structural makeup of a high-stakes exam?
Well, if we go back to that original 1965 framework by Millman, Bishop, and Ebel, test wiseness essentially falls into two distinct categories.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first category involves strategies that are universally useful on any well-constructed test. So these are totally independent of flawed questions.
Just generally good habits.
Right. We are talking about rigorous mechanical hygiene. Things like time management, pacing yourself against the clock, or, forcing yourself to read the entire stem of the question before even glancing at the options.
And error avoidance, right? Like double-checking that you didn't skip a bubble on a Scantron or click the wrong radio button on a screen.
Exactly.
I mean, it sounds like basic housekeeping, but the sources note that a devastating number of point losses on nursing entrance exams like the TEAS or HESI A2, they come purely from these unforced mechanical errors.
It's tragic, really.
Students just answer the question they expected the test to ask rather than the one literally printed on the screen in front of them.
Well, you have to remember, the human brain is a predictive engine.
Right.
Under the extreme stress and time constraints of a high-stakes exam, your brain tries to save energy by recognizing a familiar pattern and just jumping straight to the conclusion.
So you just skip to the end mentally.
Exactly.
Right.
So good mechanical hygiene is the conscious act of pumping the brakes on that predictive engine.
But the second category of test wiseness, that's where the real espionage happens, isn't it?
Definitely.
These are the strategies designed to actively exploit flawed test items. This relies heavily on deductive reasoning and basically clue exploitation.
Yes, and one of the most fascinating examples in the research is this mathematical concept called convergence.
Right, convergence.
It's a brilliant exploitation of the test writer's psychology. Let's look at a 2003 study by Yigal Atali and Maya Barhela.
Okay.
They ran massive analyses on huge commercial item banks like the SAT, looking for patterns in how test developers create distractors.
And just to clarify, distractors is the industry term for the wrong answer choices, right?
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is what they found about those distractors. The correct numerical answer is almost never the extreme outlier.
So if you have a math question and the answer choices are, let's say, 2, 3, 4, and 400.
The answer is pretty much never 400.
Why is that?
You have to think about how a test writer actually does their job. They cannot just pull random numbers out of thin air for the wrong answers.
Because a totally random number is just too obvious.
Right. Instead, they build distractors as plausible near misses.
Okay, plausible near misses.
Yeah. The test writer literally sits down, calculates the math problem, and purposefully makes a common mistake.
Like forgetting to carry a 1.
Or dividing instead of multiplying at the very last step, and then they use that result as a distractor.
Oh, wow.
Because of this methodology, the options naturally cluster or converge around the true value.
It's like looking at a dartboard and seeing a tight cluster of 3 darts right near the bullseye, and then one stray dart buried in the drywall 3 feet away.
That's exactly it.
Even if you didn't see the person throw them, you can safely bet the dart in the drywall isn't what they were aiming for. The extreme outliers are mathematically safe to eliminate.
And Atali and Barhill, they documented other structural tells too. They found that correct answers were not uniformly distributed across the A, B, C, and D options.
Wait, really? There's a bias?
Yes. There was a statistically significant bias toward the middle positions, so B and C.
No way.
Yeah. Item writers, acting entirely subconsciously, felt that making A or D the correct answer left it too exposed.
So they wanted to bury the correct answer in the middle of the pack to kind of camouflage it.
Exactly.
The sources also detail grammatical agreement flaws, which I thought was wild.
Oh, yeah.
For decades, if a question stem ended with the words and then a blank, a test-wise student would instantly eliminate any answer choice that started with a consonant.
Just solely based on the rules of English grammar.
Right. Or they would hunt for absolute qualifiers.
Yes, the absolutes.
If an answer choice contained the words always or never, it was an immediate red flag that the option was a false distractor.
Because in the nuance of clinical medicine or biology, absolute exceptions are the norm.
Things are rarely always or never.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, the testing industry eventually realized their test banks were completely compromised by these mechanical tells.
Now they figured it out.
They did. The very fact that grammatical cues and absolute qualifiers were so highly exploitable forced a massive evolution.
So they adapted.
Yes. If you sit down for a modern NCLEX-style nursing exam today, the item writing guidelines actively forbid the use of absolute qualifiers and distractors.
And they probably use software to randomize the position of the correct answer, right? To eliminate that middle bias.
Precisely. The test makers patched the software.
Which means relying on a crude 1970s trick like, always pick C or pick the longest answer for a 2020s HESI or TEAS exam is a really great way to fail.
And a terrible strategy today, yeah.
The glaring flaws have largely been engineered out of the system.
And because the test developers successfully closed those structural loopholes, modern test takers are now forced into a much more difficult battle.
Which is?
They are no longer fighting the sloppy grammar of the test writer. They are fighting their own internal psychology.
Which brings us to the second half of our mission. Making sure you aren't sabotaging yourself.
Yes.
Because the sources spend a massive amount of time debunking these persistent psychological myths that actively drain points from really competent students.
All the myths are everywhere.
And the undisputed king of these myths is the age-old advice. Never change your answer. Always trust your first instinct.
It is astonishing how deeply ingrained that myth is in our educational culture. And honestly, it is arguably the most damaging piece of advice a test taker can receive.
Really? The most damaging?
The data on this is unequivocal. The source highlights a research review by Kruger, Wirtz, and Miller, which actually corroborated a landmark prior review of over 30 independent studies. Every single rigorously controlled study finds the exact opposite of the myth.
So changing your answer is good.
Yes. When students go back, review a flagged question, and change their answer, those changes go from wrong to right roughly twice as often as they go from right to wrong.
Wait, 2 to 1.
2 to 1.
It is statistically a massive advantage to change your answer if you have a reasoned doubt.
Absolutely.
But wait, in the actual moment of taking a test, changing your answer usually feels terrible.
Oh, it feels awful.
It feels like you are just second-guessing yourself into a full-blown panic spiral. Why does human intuition get this so wrong?
Well, the answer lies in a cognitive bias known as the availability heuristic.
Okay, the availability heuristic.
Right. Our brains do not evaluate risk based on statistical reality. They evaluate risk based on how easily we can recall a similar event and how much emotional pain that memory carries.
So when you change an answer from wrong to right, the brain barely registers it.
Nope.
You get the point. You feel a brief moment of relief, and you just move on. It's an emotionally flat experience.
But changing an answer from right to wrong,
Oh, that stings.
that is a uniquely agonizing, highly emotional experience. You had the correct answer in your grasp, and you actively threw it away.
Right.
So your brain tags that memory with a massive emotional warning label to ensure you never, ever do it again.
So like evolutionary biology at work. It's like remembering the one single time you accidentally touched a hot stove and burned your hand. But you completely forget the thousands of times you successfully cooked dinner safely. Your brain just violently screams, "Stoves are evil, never touch them."
Yeah.
Even though the statistical reality is that stoves are overwhelmingly useful.
That is a perfect analogy, and that evolutionary survival mechanism actively works against you in a standardized testing environment.
So how do we fight it?
This is where a concept called metacognition becomes critical.
Metacognition.
Yeah, metacognition is simply the ability to monitor your own thinking, knowing how you know something, and objectively evaluating your own level of certainty.
Okay.
Under the extreme pressure of a nursing entrance exam, you have to actively override your brain's survival instinct. If you revisit a question, apply logic, and realize your first instinct was just a guess, the empirical data demands that you change the answer.
But that fear of making a painful mistake,
Yeah.
it doesn't just stop people from changing answers, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It actually paralyzes them into leaving difficult questions entirely blank. Which brings up another massive mathematical error students make. The myth that guessing is pointless.
Oh, this is a devastating error in strategy, particularly on modern exams.
Yeah.
On tests that do not employ a guessing penalty, which, by the way, includes the TEAS, the HESI A2, and most modern licensing exams, leaving an answer blank is a mathematical failure.
Let's actually walk through the math on this just to show exactly how it works.
Sure.
If you encounter a question that completely baffles you and you leave it blank out of a misplaced sense of honesty or just fear, you score 0 points.
Right, 0.
But if you guess blindly on a standard 4-option question, you have a 25% chance of getting it right.
Yes.
So over the course of 4 impossibly hard questions, a blank leaves you with 0 points. But blind guessing mathematically yields an expected value of 1 full point.
And a positive expected value means that over a large enough sample size, the action is guaranteed to yield a net gain. When there is no penalty deducting points for incorrect answers, a wrong answer and a blank answer both score a 0.
So there is literally 0 mathematical downside to taking the guess.
None whatsoever. Yet test takers repeatedly leave questions blank because they just fail to understand the scoring mechanics running behind the scenes.
But if the math so heavily favors the test taker guessing, why did the testing industry ever allow that dynamic to exist?
Well, that unveils a fascinating 60-year evolutionary arms race between test makers and test takers.
Right. And for you listening, understanding this arms race is critical because the collateral damage of this battle is literally your career.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the history of testing policy.
Okay.
In the early days, researchers merely described the psychology of clever test takers. But as the stakes grew higher, determining college admissions, medical licenses, professional certifications, the industry realized they couldn't just observe anymore.
They had to act.
They had to create rigid engineering rules to close the loopholes.
Right, like in the 1980s and 90s, measurement researchers like Thomas Halladina and Stephen Downing developed these massive, comprehensive taxonomies of item writing guidelines.
Exactly. These became the strict gold standard rules for anyone building a standardized test.
They mandated balanced option lengths. They audited out those grammatical giveaways we talked about. They built algorithms to neutralize convergence.
And this structural tightening sparked a massive debate regarding the commercial coaching industry.
Well, I bet.
Companies were charging desperate students thousands of dollars, promising them secret strategies to beat these newly fortified tests.
Right.
The sources highlight a highly influential 1981 review by Samuel Messick and Anne Youngeblood, which rigorously analyzed the actual efficacy of commercial coaching for exams like the SAT.
And what did they find? Did the expensive coaching actually work, or was it just marketing hype?
Well, it worked, but not in the way the marketing suggested.
Wow.
Messick and Youngeblood found that commercial coaching did produce real, measurable score gains. However, those gains were relatively modest.
Like how modest?
Maybe a few dozen points. And more importantly, the data showed that the score increases tracked almost perfectly with the sheer number of hours the student invested in studying and practicing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the gains did not come from learning secret, magical test hacking tricks.
Meaning the expensive coaching companies were basically just providing a highly structured environment that forced students to actually do the hard work.
Exactly.
Just rigorously reviewing content and practicing that basic mechanical hygiene we talked about earlier. The magic trick was just disciplined repetition.
Yes. But the testing companies, however, they still made some monumental strategic blunders as they tried to outmaneuver the test prep industry.
Like what?
Well, the most famous example is the SAT's historical use of the guessing penalty.
Right, I remember that.
For decades, the SAT actively deducted a fraction of a point for every incorrect answer. The stated goal was to mathematically cancel out the positive expected value of blind guessing, which theoretically neutralizes test wiseness.
But they finally abandoned that penalty in 2016. So why did a seemingly logical mathematical safeguard completely fail?
It failed because human behavior isn't a perfect mathematical formula.
Okay.
The penalty was designed to level the playing field. Instead, highly coached, savvy students learned exactly how to calculate risk.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They learned that if they could eliminate even one distractor, making an educated guess was suddenly mathematically profitable.
Right.
But anxious students or lower-income students who couldn't afford risk management coaching, they would chronically underguess.
Because they were terrified of the penalty.
Exactly. So they would leave questions blank even when they possessed enough knowledge to narrow down the options.
So the test completely lost its construct validity again.
Yes.
It was no longer measuring a student's reading comprehension or algebra skills.
Right.
It was actively measuring their psychological risk tolerance and their access to expensive test prep coaching.
Precisely. The penalty punished the exact demographics the test was ostensibly trying to protect. And this failure is why exams like the ACT never adopted a guessing penalty, and why crucial nursing entrance exams today, like the TEAS and the HESI A2, strictly avoid them.
They learned their lesson.
They did. Instead of punishing the student, modern testing agencies moved the problem to the back-end algorithms.
So what does this all mean for how tests are actually scored today? Like, how does a computer know the difference between a student who truly understands clinical pharmacology and a student who just got incredibly lucky on 5 guesses in a row?
Well, the answer is a highly complex psychometric model called item response theory, or IRT.
Item response theory.
Right. Unlike classical test theory, which simply adds up your raw correct answers, IRT weighs the data of every single interaction you have with the test.
Okay.
Specifically, modern testing uses a 3-parameter logistic model, and the third parameter in that algorithm is called the C parameter.
The guessing parameter.
The C parameter explicitly calculates the mathematical probability that a low-ability examinee got a highly difficult question right, purely by chance.
Oh.
Yeah, so if the algorithm watches, you get 10 basic fraction questions wrong, but then you suddenly nail an advanced calculus question, the algorithm doesn't assume you are a sudden math prodigy.
That makes sense.
It mathematically flags that correct answer as a statistical anomaly, like a 25% probability guess, and weighs the value of that point accordingly to protect the validity of the final score.
And they also run distractor analysis behind the scenes before a question even counts toward your official score.
They absolutely do.
The computer looks at the metadata to see which wrong answers are being chosen by the highest scoring students.
Right, the A students.
Yeah. So if the students who are acing the rest of the exam are all consistently falling for the exact same wrong answer on one specific question, the computer recognizes that the item writer created a flawed, confusing trick.
And what happens to it?
The question gets flagged, audited, and often thrown out entirely.
It operates exactly like cybersecurity. Hackers find a backdoor using test wiseness, so the developers patch the software with item writing guidelines. The test takers figure out how to calculate expected value, so the test makers deploy a new IRT algorithm to neutralize it. This has been looping for 6 decades.
And the reason you need to understand this cybersecurity war is because the collateral damage is your future.
Yeah.
A 2005 article by Stephen Downing analyzed what actually happens when tests fail to follow these rigorous engineering principles. He found that flawed, exploitable items measurably lowered the overall reliability of the exam.
And the real-world consequence of lowered reliability is that it unfairly shifts pass-fail decisions for borderline students.
It's terrifying.
For a candidate sitting for the TEAS or HESI, this is not a theoretical academic debate. Nursing school admissions often rely on hard, non-negotiable composite score cutoffs.
It is entirely binary.
Yeah.
If a nursing program requires an 82 to grant you an interview, and you score an 80, you are rejected. A few points lost to poor mechanical hygiene like misbubbling an answer, or falling for the outdated myth about trusting your first instinct, or leaving a question blank because you panicked. That can literally gatekeep you from your chosen career, regardless of your actual clinical aptitude.
That is precisely why mastering the test wiseness strategies that apply to any exam is a professional necessity.
You have to do it.
By mastering mechanical hygiene, error avoidance, and emotional metacognition under stress, you ensure that the deep clinical knowledge you actually spent months studying is accurately reflected in the final output of the algorithm.
Let's bring this all together. Beating the test today requires a highly disciplined dual approach.
Okay.
First, you must practice flawless mechanical hygiene to prevent those devastating unforced errors. Manage your time, force yourself to read the full stem of the question, and never, ever leave a question blank on an exam without a guessing penalty, because the expected value demands a guess. Second, you must understand the psychological structure of the exam without falling prey to outdated myths. Do not blindly trust your gut if logic dictates otherwise, because the data proves wrong to right changes outnumber right to wrong changes 2 to 1.
Yep.
And finally, recognize that the crude structural hacks of the 1970s have been engineered out. You're taking a modernized, algorithmically defended exam.
You have to approach the testing center not just as a stressed student trying to remember biology, but as a calm, informed participant interacting with a highly structured, highly predictable assessment system.
As we close out this deep dive, there is one last, massive structural shift on the horizon that builds on everything we've uncovered today.
Oh, this is the big one.
As the multi-billion-dollar testing industry increasingly turns to artificial intelligence to autonomously generate massive banks of test questions, we have to ask a new question. Will AI finally be the ultimate developer, creating the perfect, mathematically unhackable test with zero exploitable human flaws? Or will AI, with its own inherent mechanical quirks and algorithmic biases, simply introduce a completely new set of predictable, exploitable patterns that the next generation of TestWise students will learn to hack?
That is the absolute next frontier of the psychometric arms race. I mean, the testing environment is going to change faster in the next 5 years than it has in the last 60.
It really is. Keep questioning the structures of the information you face, whether you are analyzing an exam, an article, or an algorithm. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.